For most people living in the present age, the idea of a 3,000-year-old armistice sounded like something pulled out of an old legend. Children heard stories about ancient wars between humans and alien civilizations, but they grew up believing those tales were only for entertainment. Even adults treated them as nothing more than myths that old historians liked to argue about. Life was peaceful, technology was advanced, and humanity had spread across several star systems. It felt impossible that long-forgotten enemies might still exist somewhere out there, but the truth was hidden in dusty vaults of the Terran archive, where only a few researchers worked quietly. Among them was a dedicated historian who spent years studying ancient records and strange fragments of old star maps. She enjoyed her work not because of adventure or excitement, but because she felt someone needed to protect the past from being completely forgotten. Most days in the archive were calm, even boring, but she didn't mind. She believed history always mattered, especially when everyone else ignored it. One quiet morning, she came across a sealed box that looked older than those starships flying today. She scanned it, expecting nothing unusual, but the scanner lit up with warning signs. The box was coated with a diplomatic seal from the early era of space travel. That alone was rare, but the message she found inside was even stranger. It was a document confirming the existence of an official armistice between humanity and a group called the HFY Dominion. The treaty clearly stated it would expire in the current year. At first, she thought the document might be fake, maybe a leftover piece from some historical simulation. But the more she checked, the clearer it became. It was real. The signature codes matched, the star charts aligned, and even the translation markers pointed to official military communication from 3,000 years ago. The armistice wasn't a myth. It was a real agreement between humans and an alien empire they once fought. The moment she understood what she had found, she felt her stomach twist. If the treaty expired this year, what would happen? Would the old enemies still care about something signed so long ago? Were they even alive? Were they watching? The possibilities made her uneasy, but she didn't waste time. She took the documents straight to the Terran Council Earth's highest decision-making body. The council members listened politely at first, but their expressions slowly shifted from interest to disbelief. One official gently told her that ancient treaties lose importance over time. Another said that if the HFY Dominion still existed, they would have contacted humanity long ago. A few even smiled at her politely, as if she were simply being overly passionate about old stories. They told her not to worry, that humanity was safe, and that a forgotten alien species was the last thing anyone needed to stress about. She left the meeting feeling frustrated. She wasn't the type to overreact, but the council's dismissal felt wrong. Something deep inside her told her this armistice mattered, even if no one believed her. She tried to convince herself she was imagining things, but the thought stayed in her mind like a quiet alarm that never fully stopped ringing. While the officials ignored her warning, news slowly spread among a few researchers, analysts, and old space veterans who still believed ancient history carried weight. Their discussions were quiet at first, almost whispered. Some shared their own discoveries, unusual signals near distant star borders, missing exploration ships, and outdated files that hinted at the HFY still being active somewhere in deep space. Individually, those signs meant nothing. Together, they painted a picture that felt unsettling. Meanwhile, everyday citizens went about their normal routines. People traveled between planets for work. Children studied virtual lessons. Drones cleaned the streets, and life continued with its usual flow. The peaceful atmosphere made it easy to believe the historian's discovery was nothing more than an academic curiosity. The idea of an alien empire returning after 3,000 years didn't fit into anyone's reality. But as the expiration date of the treaty approached, a quiet tension grew in certain corners of society. Some believed the warning. Some didn't. Most simply didn't care. Even the historian, despite her worry, knew there was little she could do now. She had shared everything she knew. She had done her job. Whatever happened next was out of her hands, not far from Earth. On a small research outpost near the edge of human territory, a team of astronomers had been tracking unusual energy signatures for months. They didn't know what caused them, but they noticed the signals always came from a region known in legends as the Silent Void, a place ancient explorers said the Vok once controlled. Most people dismissed the legends, yet the astronomers couldn't ignore the readings. Something was happening out there, something massive and coordinated. One night, as the treaty's expiration date approached its final hour, all the energy signatures aligned at once. The astronomers stared at their screens, confused. None of their equipment malfunctioned, and none of the readings made sense. It was almost as if space itself was preparing for something. One of the researchers said quietly, "It feels like they're gathering." No one disagreed. Back on Earth, a few military strategists received the historian's report and read it more carefully than the council had. They didn't panic, but they didn't dismiss it either. They knew humanity's advancements over the past 3,000 years were immense. Even if an alien empire returned, humans weren't unprepared. Quietly, without alarming the public, a few defense units were placed on standby, not out of fear, but out of caution. Still, no one truly expected anything to happen. After all, the universe was big. Too big for ancient enemies to still hold grudges. Too big for a forgotten treaty to matter. But when the final cycle of the Galactic Day ended, and the last second of the 3,000-year armistice faded away, a signal appeared. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a simple pulse of energy, a coded message. Traveling across space. It carried only one meaning. The armistice had ended. For now, humanity didn't know what the signal meant. Ordinary people continued their daily lives. Children played. Traders negotiated deals. Travelers boarded starships for routine trips. No one sensed the shift taking place in the depths of space. But in the dark regions far beyond human settlements. Something ancient opened its eyes, something that remembered the old war, something that had waited 3,000 years. And even though humanity didn't yet understand the meaning of that silent pulse, the historian felt it. She felt it the moment it happened, as if history itself whispered in her ear. The old enemy was awake, and they had not forgotten. When the armistice finally expired, nothing dramatic happened at first. No alarms, no explosions, no messages flooding official channels. Space stayed silent, as if the universe itself paused to breathe. People on Earth and across the colonies slept peacefully, unaware that the quiet was about to break in a way no one had expected. The first sign came from a mining station built on a small, cold moon. Workers that were used to long shifts, mechanical noises, and endless empty skies. But that day, their sensors detected a sudden vibration deep beneath the surface. At first, the workers thought it was a small moonquake, something ordinary. But when they checked the scanners again, the vibration was repeating in a pattern. Almost like a pulse, the station's supervisor contacted Central Command, unsure what to report. "It's not natural," he said. "It's like someone is tapping on the moon from the outside." The command officers dismissed it politely and told the station to continue monitoring. They didn't realize that the strange vibration was only the beginning. Far away, in the Terran Space Observation Center, a young technician was checking the usual data streams from distant satellites. His job was simple: make sure the satellites were functioning and record any anomalies. Sometimes he saw meteors. Sometimes he saw solar flares. But that day, he saw something entirely different. A cluster of energy points, sharp, bright, and moving with precision, appeared near the edge of human-claimed space. They weren't natural. They weren't random. They moved too cleanly, too intentionally. He ran the data twice to make sure it wasn't a glitch. It wasn't. The energy points were approaching space that had been quiet for centuries. He called his supervisor, who called her supervisor, who then called the central command. Within minutes, the room filled with officers who looked at the display with concern. One of them whispered, "This pattern, it's almost like formation movement." Yet no one wanted to jump to conclusions. No one wanted to be the person who said something that large was coming toward them. The armistice had only just expired. It felt impossible that anything would happen so quickly, so suddenly. But the formation kept moving, and soon it became clear they were not natural phenomena. They were ships. Many, many ships. Meanwhile, the historian who had discovered the ancient treaty was at home, trying to calm her thoughts. She had spent days thinking about what would happen when the armistice ended, but she had no idea the moment was already here. She was preparing tea when her communicator buzzed. When she answered, she was surprised to hear the voice of one of the council assistants. "We need you to come in," the assistant said, sounding tense. "Your discovery might be more important than we thought." She left immediately, feeling a strange heaviness in her chest. When she arrived at the council building, she saw something she had never seen before. Officials rushing through hallways. Officers speaking urgently. Screens showing star maps with glowing red points. The quiet building she knew had turned into a place full of movement and worry. She approached a group of analysts, and one of them explained the situation. Energy signatures were detected in a region long connected with the ancient Vok Dominion. No communication had been sent, no warning given. The ship simply appeared and moved with deliberate purpose. She felt her throat tighten. "Are they coming toward us?" The analyst didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked at another officer, who replied softly, "We don't know yet. But they're not drifting. They're advancing." The historian realized the thing she feared most had begun. Word spread within military circles faster than it did in the civilian world, while ordinary people still lived their normal lives, unaware of the quiet storm gathering. Commanders were preparing for something they hoped would never come. They activated long-range defense drones, calibrated shield systems, and instructed small stations to go into alert mode. Not panic mode, just alert. The goal was to stay safe without alarming the public. For now, they still hoped the unknown ships were simply passing by, or maybe conducting their own exploration. No one wanted to believe they were hostile. Not yet. Not without proof, but the proof arrived soon. A few hours later, 3 colonies reported the same strange occurrence. Bright flashes appeared in the far distance of the night sky, far enough not to harm anyone, but close enough to be seen clearly. The flashes were not explosions, not attacks on planets or people. Instead, they struck uninhabited moons near the borders of human territory. The hits left deep marks lines carved across the moon's surface, but caused no harm to humans. The timing was too precise. The targets too specific. Everyone in command understood the message. We have returned, and we are showing you our power. The historian, standing among council members who now finally believed her, felt overwhelmed. The Vok Dominion, the civilization that had signed the ancient armistice, had not faded into history. They had not forgotten the terms, and they clearly believed that once the treaty expired, war was the natural next step. One council member tried to calm the room. The attacks hit empty moons. No people were harmed. Maybe they're trying to scare us, not fight us. Another replied, "They know exactly what they're doing. They showed they can strike anywhere they want." Everyone went silent. The council sent diplomatic messages, attempting to contact the unknown fleet. They transmitted greetings, peaceful intentions, requests for dialogue. They repeated these messages across all frequencies, but they received no reply. The silence said more than any words could. Across the colonies, news outlets slowly began reporting unusual events at the borders. People asked questions. Some were curious, some nervous. But the information released to the public was controlled. The officials didn't want widespread panic. They said the events were under investigation and there was no immediate danger. Meanwhile, the military leaders watched the movements of the unknown fleet. What they saw made them shift uncomfortably in their seats. The fleet slowed down, then spread into smaller formations, each moving in a different direction. They weren't exploring. They weren't drifting. They were positioning themselves. The historian sat beside the main communication screen, watching in silence. She didn't speak, didn't try to convince anyone of anything. The situation was speaking for itself now. Minutes later, the message arrived, but it wasn't spoken in human language. It wasn't emotional. It was a simple coded declaration, translated automatically by the system. The ancient conflict resumes. The Dominion recognizes the end of the Armistice. Prepare for engagement. The moment the message appeared, the entire command center froze. It felt surreal, almost unreal, like a moment in a dream. But the cold reality settled quickly. The VOC had declared the old war active once again. Yet something unexpected happened, while civilians began to show worry online. And the council fell into heated arguments about strategy. The top human commanders reacted differently. They didn't panic. They didn't appear afraid. In fact, their expressions changed in a way the historian didn't expect. They exchanged slow, steady, confident smiles. The kind of smiles that said, "We knew this day would come." The historian felt confused. For months, she had feared humanity was unprepared. But the calmness in the commander's eyes hinted at something. Else something hidden beneath the surface, like humanity had been waiting, like humanity had prepared, like humanity had grown. Far stronger than the Dominion could ever imagine. The declaration of war had come, but humans didn't tremble. They Grin. The historian didn't know why, but she would soon learn. When the VOC Dominion sent their cold declaration, many people expected humanity to panic. After all, these were the same aliens whose ancestors once forced humans into a war so devastating that the galaxy still whispered about it in old stories. Ordinary citizens didn't know the details, but they had heard enough legends to know the VOC were powerful, ruthless, and relentless. So when the message appeared, most people thought humanity would scramble, beg for peace, or at least show fear. But none of that happened. Instead, deep inside the central command center, the highest-ranking officers looked almost calm. Some even shared a look that resembled quiet satisfaction, the kind you see when someone's long-running plan finally reaches the moment they prepared for. The historian who had uncovered the Armistice felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. She expected panic, but instead saw confidence. A soft voice inside her whispered that maybe humanity wasn't as unprepared as she had feared. Maybe something had been happening behind the scenes all along, something even she, a researcher with security access, didn't know. She didn't have to wait long to understand. One of the commanders tapped a screen and gave a simple order to the station's AI system. Open Vault Protocol. Those words meant nothing to most people in the room, but a few officers stiffened, understanding the weight behind the command. The room lights dimmed, the screens shifted, and new symbols appeared, symbols so old and classified that almost no one alive had ever seen them. The historian leaned forward. She had spent years digging through the forgotten past, yet she had never encountered anything like this. "What is the vault?" she whispered to herself. A senior officer must have heard her, because he answered softly. "The vault is humanity's real preparation, the one we never advertised." He didn't offer more explanation, but moments later, the screens filled with images that told the story on their own. For thousands of years, while humanity was building colonies, improving lifestyle, advancing medicine, and solving daily problems, another group had been working quietly in the shadows. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. They weren't politicians. They were engineers, strategists, physicists, analysts, groups of brilliant people who believed the ancient war would return one day. Their mission was simple: prepare humanity for that moment without spreading fear. They studied every scrap of old Vok technology humans recovered during the ancient conflict. They decoded fragments of Vok battle logs. They mapped the Vok's tactics, thinking style, and military philosophy. They knew the Vok believed strength must always be shown openly. They knew the Vok believed a silent enemy was a weak enemy, and so humanity did the opposite instead of showing their progress. They hid it instead of displaying their advancements. They stored them away instead of flaunting new weapons. They buried them under research labels, so boring no one would pay attention. The result of this secret effort appeared on the screens. One by one, the first image showed a massive structure floating in deep space, camouflaged within a cluster of metallic asteroids. It was not a station that ordinary citizens knew about. It wasn't even on official maps. The structure rotated slowly, surrounded by hundreds of small objects that moved like tiny stars. But they weren't stars, they were drones. Thousands of coordinated defense drones, each capable of acting independently, but connected through quantum links. The historian stared in silence. She had read about old automated systems from the ancient war, but nothing like this. These drones were sleek, adaptive, and too advanced to exist in public records. "What are those?" she asked. The officer replied, "Part of the Helian Defense Network." The name sounded unfamiliar, but powerful. He continued, "They've been building it for more than 8 centuries. Each drone can calculate enemy movement faster than a human mind can process a sentence. They don't fire unless commanded. But once activated, they can protect entire regions." Almost as if responding to the officer's words, the drones on the screen lit up, showing their internal power cores. Quiet, controlled energy flowing through perfect formation. A second screen activated, showing something even more astonishing. Long, silver-colored warships hidden inside the halos of gas giants. They rotated within thick clouds, completely invisible to outsiders. These ships didn't resemble any public human model. Their design was cleaner, sharper, almost like they were crafted with knowledge far ahead of current generations. "These are Vanguard-class ships," another officer explained. "They've been in development for nearly 500 years. Quantum shields, gravity manipulation, silent propulsion, multi-layer defense fields. They were never meant to be used unless the Vok returned." The historian felt her heart race. She realized humanity had not been naive at all. They had been patient. Very patient. Another display activated, showing an underground chamber beneath a barren planet, another hidden location. Inside it rested something enormous, shaped like an intricate sphere, with glowing lines circling across the surface like veins of light. A quiet hum filled the background audio, deep and rhythmic. She had no idea what it was. The officer noticed her stare and smiled faintly. "That's the core of the graviton field generator. It can disable hostile technology without harming living beings. It's been tested for 200 years, safely locked away because we hoped we'd never need it." The historian felt a chill. So humanity planned all this? The officer shook his head gently. "Not planned, prepared. Planned sounds like we wanted the war. We didn't, but we knew that if the Vok ever returned, they would not return to talk." Slowly, the historian understood. While the rest of humanity lived in peace, the quiet defenders of society, the scientists, the commanders, The strategists worked day and night to ensure that peace would not turn into helplessness. They were not seeking war or dominance. They simply refused to let history repeat itself. The Vok had spent 3,000 years thinking humans were still the same species their ancestors had fought, the same species that once relied on fragile early ships and primitive energy weapons. The Vok believed humans were predictable, emotional, and easily scared. They thought humans would fall apart the moment they faced overwhelming power, but they were wrong. Humanity had grown in silence, evolved in patience, strengthened in unity, not all without revealing a single hint to the galaxy. The historian watched the screens shift to leave views, the Vanguard-class ships activating their systems, the drone network forming its initial protective grid, and communication links awakening like sleeping giants rising after centuries of rest. "Why hide all this?" she asked quietly. The officer answered with a tone that carried generations of wisdom. "Because the Vok respect only strength. If they believed we were strong, they would return sooner. But if they believed we were weak, they would relax. And we needed time. Lots of time? Time for what? To become something they've never faced before." Suddenly, the screen flashed with a live feed of a man standing inside a warship's command center. He wasn't wearing heavy armor or dramatic clothing. His outfit was simple and clean, and his face carried no fear. Just a calm, controlled readiness. He spoke only 4 words: "Activate all silent protocols." Every officer in the command room repeated the order. Every drone lit up. Every stealth ship moved into position. Every hidden system awakened. The historian, overwhelmed, whispered, "So this is humanity's real strength." The officer beside her nodded. "This is what we've become." Far across the galaxy, the Vok Dominion believed they had surprised humanity. But in truth, the moment they declared the ancient war resumed, they stepped into a battlefield humans had prepared for longer than any empire in history. And for the first time in 3,000 years, humanity wasn't afraid. They were ready. The night after the attack felt heavier than any the world had experienced in centuries. Cities that once glowed with bright lights dimmed their towers to avoid being easy targets. Streets that were normally filled with noise went quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath at the same time. Humanity had stepped into a new chapter, and no one knew what the next page would bring. Yet even in the quiet fear, people continued working, planning, and preparing. No one wanted to show the enemy that humans were afraid. Inside the mountain facility, the core group stayed awake long after midnight. They moved from screen to screen, checking reports from around the planet. Digital maps showed points of conflict, lines of enemy movement, and updates from human forces. Some areas had managed to drive back enemy scouts. Other places had been hit too hard to recover quickly. Everyone read the numbers in silence, knowing that every dot represented real lives, real homes, real futures. The strategist who had taken charge earlier spoke again. His voice was calm, but the tiredness behind it was clear. He explained that humanity's biggest strength was never just weapons. It was the ability to adapt quickly, to learn from mistakes, and to create solutions faster than anyone expected. He reminded everyone that humans had faced impossible odds many times in history: massive storms, deadly diseases, huge disasters, and still survived. The difference now was that the danger came from the sky, not from nature. But the human response would be the same: endure, adapt, and push forward. Because of this mindset, teams around the world began working with a new urgency. In one corner of the facility, scientists tested updated shields meant to block incoming energy blasts. In another section, engineers worked on drones that could fly silently and gather information without being detected. Communication experts developed a safer system so all nations could share data instantly without fear of interception. Even students and volunteers from small towns recorded observations about strange lights or falling debris to help analysts build a clearer picture of the threat. Every contribution mattered. No matter how small, back on the surface, ordinary people showed the same determination. Some organized food and water supplies. Others helped build emergency shelters. In coastal cities, fishermen volunteered their boats for rescue missions. In farmlands, families shared crops with neighbors whose fields had been damaged by shockwaves. Even in places where peace was rare, people set aside arguments. Everyone agreed on one thing now. Humanity had only one side, and that side had to stand together. Meanwhile, in orbit above the planet, the enemy ships repositioned. They no longer hovered silently. Now they moved with intent, scanning regions and sending coded bursts between each other. Their shadow fell across oceans, deserts, and mountain ranges. The sight made entire populations shiver, yet something unexpected also happened. Instead of panicking, more people felt their resolve harden. Every new hostile movement only made humans more determined not to bow down. Inside one of the hidden observation rooms, a communication specialist received a signal unlike any seen before. It wasn't from the enemy, nor from any human device. It was something ancient, something from the deep archives stored underground. The message was old, older than any modern system, and had been locked away for emergencies that were never expected to come. When decoded, it revealed a forgotten agreement. A message written by the group of humans who had negotiated the Armistice. 3,000 years earlier, the document explained that the enemy would never accept humans as equals. They had agreed to peace long ago, only because humans were not seen as a threat at the time. But the message also revealed something else, something that lit a new fire inside the room. The enemy did not fully understand human technology, human growth, or how quickly humans evolved. They believed the species stayed the same for thousands of years, not realizing how rapidly humans advanced. To them, humanity was frozen in time. They expected to return after 3 millennia and find an unchanged, weak race. This misunderstanding was not a disadvantage. It was a weapon. The strategist gathered everyone and explained that the enemy didn't truly know what humans were capable of now. While the enemy believed humanity still used old-style weapons, humans had long surpassed those levels. The enemy expected a scared, primitive response. Instead, they were about to face something they were completely unprepared for. This insight changed everything. Work intensified across the facility. Teams rushed to finalize new prototypes. Silent thrusters for fast jets, defensive towers capable of absorbing energy attacks, and communication systems that could mimic enemy signals to mislead them. It wasn't just about fighting, it was about confusing the invaders, making them question their assumptions, making them hesitate. While this planning unfolded, in a small town far from the mountains, a quiet scene showed the human spirit in its purest form. A group of farmers stood together in their fields, staring at the night sky. Instead of fear, their expressions showed a calm acceptance. They knew they couldn't build weapons or decode signals, but they could stay steady. They could offer support to those fighting. They could protect their families and keep life moving. One of them said softly that no matter what happened, they wouldn't allow fear to change who they were. The others nodded. Humanity's strength was not just in its technology, it was in its heart. Across oceans, a group of young students volunteered to collect data from their telescopes. They used simple equipment, but their observations helped scientists map enemy positions more accurately. In busy cities, transport workers stayed on duty to keep emergency routes open. Even artists contributed, creating calming broadcasts to prevent panic and keep people grounded. Every action, small or large, built a foundation for the resistance forming across the world. Back in space, the invaders prepared to launch a larger strike. Their ships aligned in a slow pattern, creating a formation that had only been seen once before during the ancient war 3,000 years ago. When analysts detected this formation, they realized the enemy planned to test a massive beam that could disable large regions. The planet had less than a day before the strike. The strategist gathered all team leaders and laid out a plan that had been forming quietly for hours. The idea was bold and risky, something that might fail if even one detail went wrong. But it was also the only option that could prevent widespread destruction. The core of the plan was simple: misdirection. Humans would force the enemy to aim their massive strike at a decoy location. Meanwhile, human forces would secretly move into position to disrupt the enemy formation from the inside to carry out the plan. Communication experts used the enemy's own signals against them, sending false coordinates that looked completely authentic. Engineers prepared drones that would simulate heat signatures and energy spikes at the decoy site. Pilots practiced maneuvers that had never been tested outside simulations. Hours passed. The world watched the sky, waiting for something to happen. Finally, enemy ships began charging their weapon. A faint glow built up beneath one of their largest vessels. The energy gathered slowly, turning brighter and more intense. Human satellites picked it up instantly. Alerts flashed across screens. The strategist gave the final order. The decoy activated. Massive heat signatures flared from an empty desert, exactly where the enemy believed they would cause the most damage. The alien ship rotated, its weapon aligned toward the fake source. Just as the glow reached its brightest point, human drones launched their counteraction. Speeding silently, they swarmed around the enemy formation, releasing bursts of interference designed to distort the alignment. The giant beam fired too early, too unfocused, and instead of hitting the decoy city, it struck empty ground far from any settlement. The earth shook. Sand flew into the sky, and a crater formed. But no lives were lost. For the first time, humanity had forced the enemy to miss. A wave of hope swept across the world. Inside the command room, people didn't cheer. They were too focused, but their eyes held a spark that hadn't been there before. They knew the battle wasn't over. The enemy still had power, resources, and ships. But the myth of alien perfection had cracked. The invaders could be tricked. They could be outsmarted. They could be defeated. The strategist looked around at everyone, feeling the shift in the air. What had started as fear was turning into unity. What had felt like the end was beginning to look like a chance. Humans were not backing down. If anything, they were stronger now than they had been at the start. And for the first time since the Armistice broke, humanity allowed itself to believe one thing: this war could be won. When the Vok Dominion finally retreated from the battlefield, the galaxy expected humanity to react with wild celebration or loud triumph. But nothing like that happened. Humans didn't cheer loudly or shout victory speeches. They didn't show off their power or mock the defeated enemy. Instead, the moment the last Vok ship pulled back into deep space, the Terran commanders simply stood there in cold silence, their expressions calm and unreadable. To the Vok, this silence was more terrifying than any roar of victory. On one of the ships, a Vok advisor watched the human fleet on the monitors. He had lived his entire life believing humans were emotional and unpredictable. But now, seeing their calm faces, their unwavering posture, and their steady eyes, he felt an unexpected feeling rising inside him: uncertainty. It was something the Vok rarely experienced. They were a proud species, known for never showing fear. But something about the humans' quiet strength unsettled them. The retreating fleets expected humans to chase them or send threats. But the humans didn't move. They remained in their positions, waiting with a cold, steady patience. It didn't look like fear. It looked like discipline. Back at the Terran Command Center, the historian watched every screen carefully. Even though she was not a soldier, she had been allowed to stay because she was one of the few alive who understood the history behind this moment. She had studied the original war. She knew how humanity had once suffered. And she knew the Vok believed the expiration of the Armistice would put humans into panic. But as the battle ended and the Vok pulled back, the historian realized something powerful. The Vok finally understood the truth. Humanity was no longer the same species they fought 3,000 years ago. A message suddenly appeared on the main communication screen. Not from the Vok leaders yet, but from their outer fleets requesting an urgent channel. The Vok wanted to talk. They wanted to negotiate. They wanted to understand what had changed. A Terran officer opened the channel. The Vok hologram appeared, tall and imposing, just like the ancient records described. The Vok figure stared at the humans, trying to study them, trying to find fear or pride or arrogance in their expressions. But the humans remained calm. The Vok representative hesitated before speaking. "You had these systems hidden," he said slowly, his voice heavy with caution. A Terran commander responded simply, "We prepared." The Vok narrowed his eyes. "You did not show them for 3,000 years. Strength does not need to be shown," the commander replied. "Only used when necessary." Those words struck the Vok deeply. Their own culture valued open power, open dominance, open displays of might. They believed hiding strength was weakness. Yet the humans had done the opposite, hidden everything, revealed nothing, and somehow ended up with power the Dominion had never imagined. The Vok representative tried again. "Your technology, your ships, your defenses, these were not known to us." "They were not made to impress you," the commander replied. "They were made to protect us." The simplicity of his answer made the Vok fall silent. He realized that humanity hadn't been preparing for conquest or dominance. They didn't want to attack anyone. They simply wanted to ensure that if the ancient enemy returned, humans would not be helpless again. The historian watched the Vok expression shift. It was subtle, but she could see it the moment of realization. The moment the Vok understood that humanity had evolved in ways they had underestimated. Then came the second message. This time, it was from the Vok High Council itself. Their most authoritative voice. Their most formal stance. And even their tone carried something unusual weight. Perhaps even respect. The message was short. Almost too simple for something so historic. "We ask for negotiations." The officers in the command center exchanged calm glances, but no one looked surprised. They had been expecting this. The Vok didn't beg. They didn't apologize. They didn't admit defeat. But the fact that they requested negotiations at all was a sign of something important. They no longer viewed humans as prey. They saw them as equals. The historian took a slow breath. She remembered reading old accounts of the Vok's first war with humanity. Back then, humans had fought desperately, losing system after system because they were technologically inferior. Those days had been filled with fear, last-minute evacuations, and reckless bravery. Humanity survived that war only through unity and stubbornness. Not superior strength, but now things were different. This time, humanity didn't rely on desperation. This time, humanity relied on preparation. This time, the Vok felt uncertainty. A communication officer looked at the Terran commander. "Should we accept the negotiation request?" The commander gave a small nod. "Yes, but on our terms." The historian felt a shiver of pride. For the first time in 3 millennia, negotiations would not be shaped by fear or weakness. They would be shaped by strength, quiet, controlled, responsible strength. A meeting was arranged on neutral territory, a station built long ago for peaceful talks, rarely used. Before the commander left for the meeting, he spoke to the historian. "You discovered the truth," he said. Without you, we might not have been ready. She smiled softly. I only found an old treaty. You all did the real work. He shook his head. Finding the truth is real work. The meeting between humans and Vok was tense but calm. The Vok council members arrived with their usual grandeur, towering and imposing. But their tone was different. For the first time, they didn't speak like conquerors. They spoke like negotiators. We recognize humanity's new strength, they said. We recognize your preparation. The commander responded, and we recognize your willingness to speak. Both sides understood that open conflict would no longer serve either species. Humanity had power the Vok could not predict. The Vok had resources and experience that humans did not underestimate. A balance had formed, one not created out of fear, but out of respect. At the end of the meeting, the commander offered a final statement. He looked directly at the Vok Council and said in a quiet, steady voice, "The armistice is over. But the galaxy does not need another war. We ask only that you understand this. Humanity is not what it once was." The Vok leader paused, studying the human faces, the human calmness, the human confidence. "We understand," he finally replied. When the delegation returned to Terran space, there were no loud celebrations, no dramatic speeches. Humans continued their lives. Children went to school. Workers returned to their jobs. Traders resumed their routes. It felt almost ordinary, but deep down, every human knew something had changed forever. The old fear was gone. Humanity was no longer seen as the fragile young species struggling to survive in a harsh universe. They were recognized as a united, disciplined, and quietly powerful civilization, one that didn't seek to dominate, but refused to be dominated. Later that night, the historian sat outside on a balcony, watching the stars. Those same stars had once watched humanity struggle. Now they watched humanity rise. She didn't feel pride in the sense of victory. She felt pride in the sense of growth earned through centuries of patience and effort. The war didn't end because the Vok lost. It ended because the Vok understood a truth they never expected. When pushed into silence, humanity does not weaken. Humanity prepares. Humanity evolves. Humanity becomes stronger than anyone ever imagined. In the end, the galaxy didn't remember this event as the day the Vok surrendered. It remembered it as the day the Vok changed their view of humans forever.